She had looked at herself in the glass that morning and decided she would do. Not well, not beautifully, just do. The dress was gray wool, a little too large at the shoulders, borrowed from a woman at the coaching inn, who had taken pity on her and asked no questions. Her hair was pinned back the way her old nursemaid used to wear hers, flat, severe, practical. Her hands, which had once been kept soft with rose water, were already roughening at the knuckles from 2 days of cold travel. She thought that was probably an advantage. She had her reasons for all of it. She had thought them through very carefully over the course of a very long and sleepless night, listening to coaches arrive and depart in the yard below. And she had arrived at the conclusion that there was simply no other way. Ashworth Park had been her father's. It was hers now, or ought to have been. But the solicitors had found a clause, or claimed to have found one. And her uncle, her father's younger brother, a man she had met perhaps 4 times in her life, had contested the will. The case was still being argued somewhere in the dry, dusty rooms where such things were argued. That process, she had been told, could take years. In the meantime, the estate had been placed under the management of a trustee. The trustee was a duke. His name was Edmund Voss, the Duke of Carwick, and he had apparently known her father in some capacity. She did not know how, precisely, because no one had thought to explain this to her, being too occupied with explaining that she, Marian Ashworth, daughter of the late Sir George Ashworth, had no legal standing to enter or reside in her own home for the duration of the proceedings. She had listened to all of this with the careful stillness she had learned from watching her mother navigate difficult rooms. Then she had gone back to the modest set of rooms she had taken in the village, with the last of the money her father's solicitor had managed to release, and she had sat by the window for a long time looking at nothing. Then she had gone to see Mrs. Renwick, who ran the coaching inn. The advertisement had been simple enough. Ashworth Park required a lady's companion. References preferred but not essential for the right candidate. Apply to Mrs. Dunbar, housekeeper. The right candidate, Marian had thought. She supposed she would have to become one. She arrived on a Tuesday in early November, when the grounds were stripped bare, and the gravel drive ran silver gray under a low sky. The park looked smaller than she remembered, and larger at the same time. Smaller because she was arriving at the tradesman's entrance, and larger because she was arriving alone, with a single bag and no one to meet her. Mrs. Dunbar met her in the stone-flagged corridor near the kitchen. She was a tall woman, angular, with the particular expression of someone who had spent many years managing a large household and had long since run out of patience for people who required managing. "Miss Hartley," she said, looking Marian up and down with the practiced efficiency of a woman assessing an object rather than a person. That was the name Marian had given. Anne Hartley. She had taken it from a distant cousin she had not seen since childhood and thought it plain enough to cause no curiosity. "Yes?" Marian said. "You have references?" She produced the letter she had written herself, on paper she had bought at the village stationer's, signed with a name she had invented. She had felt rather sick doing it and rather competent, which was a strange combination. Mrs. Dunbar read it twice. Then she folded it and said, "His Grace expects certain standards. The ladies who have held this position in the past have found it demanding." "I am not easily discouraged," Marian said. Mrs. Dunbar looked at her. "We shall see." The room she was shown to was in the east wing, 3 flights up, with a view of the kitchen garden and a ceiling that sloped at an angle that made it impossible to stand upright near the window. The bed was narrow, the fireplace was small. The curtains were green and had been green for a very long time. Marian set her bag down on the bed and stood very still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. She had grown up in this house. She had run down the main staircase and been scolded for it. She had sat in the library while her father read aloud to her. She had known every corridor, every creaking floorboard, every particular smell of each room in each season. She knew that the third step on the back stairs had always given a little under pressure on the right side, and that the roses in the east garden bloomed 2 weeks later than they should have because of the shadow from the wall. She was standing in a room of her own house, in a dress that was not hers, with a name that was not hers, and the effort of not showing any of this on her face was considerable. She unpacked her bag instead. She had done enough sitting and feeling. She met the Duke on her second morning. She had been told he rode early and was not to be disturbed before 10 o'clock under ordinary circumstances. So she had not expected to encounter him in the corridor outside the library at 8:30, still in his riding coat with mud on his boots. He was taller than she had imagined. She was not sure why she had imagined him at all. She supposed because he had been a significant figure in her mind for several weeks, the abstract person responsible for the management of something that was not his to manage. In her imagination, he had been vague and authoritative. In person, he was specific and, she searched for the word, tired. Not old, perhaps 32 or 33, with dark hair that needed cutting and the look of a man who had slept poorly for reasons he did not intend to discuss. He stopped when he saw her. "You are the new companion," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace, Anne Hartley." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not immediately read. Then he looked down at his boots, which were, as she had noted, quite thoroughly muddy, and back at her. "Mrs. Dunbar will know where the boot-cleaning things are kept," he said. "See to these before luncheon." He pulled the boots off in the corridor. There was a boot jack near the door, she noticed. Her father had put it there 30 years ago and handed them to her. Then he went into the library and closed the door. Marian stood holding a pair of muddy boots in the corridor of her own house. She thought several things in a free-pted succession. She thought, "This is insufferable." She thought, "I will not cry in a corridor." She thought, "I have cleaned worse things in the past fortnight and no one died of it." Then she found the boot-cleaning things, which were exactly where they had always been kept, in the small cupboard near the kitchen passage, and she set to work. She had believed, when she formed this plan, that the hardest part would be the deception itself. She had expected to find it exhausting, the constant management of expression and word, the careful editing of everything she said and did. She had not expected to find the house itself to be the harder thing. It was everywhere. Her childhood was everywhere. The window seat in the morning room where she had read through entire winters. The mark on the doorframe of the study where her father had measured her height each birthday until she was 14 and declared herself too old for it, though she had rather secretly wished he would continue. The particular sound the dining room door made, a small, soft protest, when it was opened slowly. The Duke's staff had rearranged some of the furniture. This she noticed with a precise, quiet pain she could not have explained to anyone. The library was the worst. Her father had built that collection over 40 years. She walked through it sometimes, in the evenings when the house was quiet, running her fingers along the spines, and it was in those moments that her composure felt most precarious, most like something balanced on a very thin edge. She was useful, at least. There was a small satisfaction in that. The Dowager, the Duke's elderly aunt, Lady Voss, was in residence and required a companion in the particular sense of the word, someone to read to her, to accompany her on short walks in the garden when the weather permitted, to play cards with her in the evenings and lose with Grace. Lady Voss was sharp-minded and not easy to fool, which Marian had not anticipated. "You have the look of a woman who has been somewhere better," Lady Voss said to her, about a week into her employment. They were sitting in the blue sitting room with their needlework. Outside, rain moved across the grounds in gray sheets. "I have been several places," Marian said carefully. "That's not what I mean." Lady Voss set down her needlework and looked at Marian with small, very clear eyes. "I mean, you have the look of a woman who has come down in the world and is not yet accustomed to it. It's in the hands, partly, and the way you hold your head." Marian was quiet for a moment. "A great many women come down in the world," she said at last. "Yes," Lady Voss agreed. "They do." She picked up her needlework again. "I was one of them, once, before my marriage. My father lost everything in a very stupid business arrangement." She said it with perfect equanimity, the way people speak of things that have long since been absorbed into the general history of a life. "I learned to adapt. It is what we do." Marian thought about this later, alone in her small room with the sloped ceiling. She thought about adaptation. She thought about whether adaptation was the same thing as acceptance, and whether acceptance was a form of defeat. She did not sleep well. The woman arrived on a Thursday 3 weeks into Marian's tenure. Her name was Miss Lavinia Coldwell. She was 24, possessed of considerable beauty, and a mother who had arrived with her, and she had been, it quickly became apparent, expected. Marian understood within the first hour of Miss Coldwell's arrival what she was expected for. The way Mrs. Dunbar ordered extra fires laid in the guest rooms. The way the Duke, who was generally not present at luncheon, appeared at luncheon. The way Lady Voss, who had thus far spoken of her nephew with a fond and slightly exasperated frankness, became suddenly careful. Miss Coldwell was, by any reasonable measure, exactly the sort of woman a duke ought to marry. She was handsome, composed, well-connected, and had the particular talent of appearing warm, while actually being very carefully managed. She spoke pleasantly to everyone. She spoke to servants, however, with a different voice than she used with everyone else. It was subtle enough that many people would not have noticed it. Marian noticed it. She had spent the past weeks learning to be invisible, which meant she had spent the past weeks watching everything. Miss Coldwell did not speak cruelly. Exactly. She did not raise her voice. She simply used a particular tone, flat, precise, absent, that made clear she did not consider the person she was speaking to fully present. It was the tone of someone who had learned very young that there were no consequences to this. On the 4th day of Miss Coldwell's visit, she handed Marian a pile of correspondence to be sorted and said, without looking at her, "Try not to mix them up. The last girl made a dreadful mess." Marian took the correspondence. "Of course," she said. She sorted the letters in the small writing room off the corridor, and while she sorted them, she permitted herself, very quietly, to be furious. Not at Miss Coldwell specifically. She had met Miss Coldwell's type before, and found them mostly pitiable, but at the whole arrangement of the world, which had contrived to put her in this room, sorting these letters, in this house that was hers, under these conditions that were not. She was still sorting them when the Duke appeared in the doorway. He did it sometimes, appeared unexpectedly in rooms where she happened to be working. She had not yet determined whether this was deliberate or simply the natural movement of a man who was restless in his own residence. He had, she had observed, the quality of a person who was not entirely comfortable staying still. "There is a copy of Blackstone's Commentaries that should be in the lower shelf of the East Library," he said. "Do you know where it is?" "No," she said. Then, because this was untrue, and because some things were easier to offer than others, though if it is not on the lower shelf, it may have been moved to the alcove near the window. The previous owner, I believe, kept the legal volumes there." He looked at her. "You know a good deal about the arrangement of this library for someone who has been here 3 weeks. Mrs. Dunbar gave me a thorough tour," Marian said, which was also untrue, but closer to true than some of her other statements. The Duke was quiet for a moment. He was watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, thoughtful and slightly arrested, as though something had caught his attention that he had not expected to find there. "Where did you work before this?" he asked. "In Lincolnshire," she said. This was vague enough to be safe, and before that, she met his eyes. "I grew up in the country," she said. "My father had a small estate. He died 2 years ago." All of this was true. She found it was easier to tell the truth where she could. Fewer things to remember. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it simply, without the ceremonial quality that condolences usually acquired, as though he meant it specifically and not in general. She nodded and returned to the letters. He went and found his book. She had been at Ashworth Park for 6 weeks when she found the portrait. She had known it was there, of course. It had always been there, in the upper corridor of the north wing, where the light from the east-facing windows caught it well in the morning. Her grandfather had commissioned it. Her father had refused to have it moved. Her mother, at 23, standing in the garden with Ashworth Park visible behind her. She had not gone to the north wing since her arrival. She had been carefully avoiding it. She went on a Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet. She told herself she was checking whether the windows in that corridor needed attention. A plausible enough reason if anyone asked. She walked the corridor slowly, checking windows, until she reached the portrait and stopped. Her mother looked back at her. Marian had her mother's eyes. She knew this because she had been told it, often, and she could see it now with a particular clarity that was almost unbearable. The same shape, the same expression of watchful attention, the same quality of someone who was taking in a great deal and revealing rather little. She stood there for a long time. She did not hear the footsteps until they were quite close. She turned, and the Duke was standing at the end of the corridor. He was looking at the portrait. Then he was looking at her. Then he was looking at the portrait again, and something was happening in his expression that she could not entirely account for. A careful, deliberate process of addition. "Who is that?" he said. "I believe it is the previous owner's wife," Marian said. Her voice was very steady. She was quite proud of her voice in that moment. "Yes," he said. "I know who she is. I've walked past this portrait 100 times." He was still looking at it. "I was trying to understand why she looks so much like you." Marian did not say anything. "She had a daughter," he said. "Sir George's daughter. The heir or the would-be heir. The solicitors have mentioned her." He turned and looked at Marian with a directness that she had not encountered from him before, and she understood that the process of addition had been completed. "What is your name?" The house was quiet. Somewhere below, she could hear the distant sound of a door closing. She had thought about this moment. She had thought about it many times, what she would say if it came, and she had composed several versions of an answer. She had planned to be calm and controlled and strategic. She was tired of being strategic. "Marian," she said. "Marian Ashworth." The silence that followed was long enough that she became aware of the particular quality of afternoon light in this corridor, the way it came through the east windows at that angle and fell across the floorboards in long pale strips. "Why?" he said, at last, not accusatory, genuinely, plainly asking. She thought of the letters from the solicitors, the clause in the will that her uncle claimed to have found, the months of being told to wait, to be patient, to trust the process, while the process moved along its glacial course and the house and everything in it continued on without her, because no one was going to let me come home otherwise, she said. He did not expose her that evening. He did not expose her the next day either, and by the third day she understood that he was not going to expose her, though she could not have explained precisely how she knew this. What he did instead was nothing, nothing overt, nothing that any observer could have pointed to and named. He did not seek her out. He did not avoid her. He continued in his usual manner, which was restless and somewhat preoccupied, with the specific distraction of a man who was thinking about something he had not resolved. Miss Coldwell and her mother departed on the Friday. Marian watched their carriage go down the drive from the upper corridor and felt something she identified, with some surprise, as relief. Lady Voss, who missed nothing, said that evening at cards. Miss Coldwell is a very accomplished young woman. Yes, Marian agreed. My nephew, I think, found her very accomplished. Yes. Lady Voss looked at her cards. Edmund has never been easy to marry off, she said, in the reflective tone of someone who is not quite talking to the person she appears to be talking to. He has the unfortunate quality of actually thinking about things before he does them. His father was the same. It makes them reliable in the long run and profoundly irritating in the short term. Marian organized her hand. That seems like a reasonable trade. I have always thought so. Lady Voss played a card, though the short term can be very long indeed when you are living through it. He came to find her on a Sunday morning, 10 days after the corridor. She was in the library. She had stopped pretending not to know where things were, which was a relief. Writing a letter to her solicitor. It was a letter she wrote every few weeks, asking for news, receiving in return careful language that communicated nothing. The solicitors have had a development, he said. She set down her pen. Your uncle's claim has a problem, he said. The clause he found, there is a question about the date, whether it was added to the original document or inserted later. He chose the word precisely. My own solicitor has raised this with the court. It will take some time to resolve, but the indication is he paused. It is looking more favorable. She looked at him. How long have you known this? A week. I wanted to be certain before I told you. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the library windows, the winter garden was bare and brown and very still. You could have told them who I was, she said. When you found out, you could have had me removed. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? He was quiet, in the way she had learned was not evasion but consideration. He moved to the window and looked out at the garden for a moment before he spoke. Your father was not a close friend of mine, he said, but he was a good man, and I respected him. He spoke of you. He paused, and because, when I looked at what you had done, coming here as you did, managing as you have, I thought you had earned something. He turned back to her. I thought you had earned the right to stay until it was resolved at the very least. She had not cried in 6 weeks. She had been very determined about this. She was determined about it now, and largely successful. Earned the right, she repeated. Yes, he said. There was a pause. It was not an uncomfortable pause. It was the kind of pause that contains something that neither person in it is quite ready to say. The portrait, he said, at last, was how I knew, though I think I had begun to suspect before that. He looked at her. You knew where everything was. You knew this house. I grew up here, she said. I know where the third step on the back stairs gives a little on the right side. I know the roses in the east garden bloom 2 weeks late because of the shadow from the wall. I know that my father put the boot jack in that corridor because he was tired of sitting down to pull his boots off. Something crossed his face that she might have called, in a weaker moment, tenderness. The boot jack, he said. I wondered about that. It seemed an odd place for it. It was exactly the right place for him, she said. He had a bad knee. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the directness that she had come to recognize as one of his more consistent qualities, I should like, if you are willing, to write a separate letter to the court myself, in support of the claim. I have some standing in this matter as trustee, and I should like to use it. She looked at him. On your behalf, he said, in case this was unclear. I understood you, she said. She thought about the 6 weeks she had spent in this house, the letters sorted and the boots cleaned, and the boots that had been her first task here, and would now, it seemed, be a particular kind of memory. She thought about Lady Voss at cards in the evenings, and the portrait in the north wing, and the boot jack in the corridor, and the way the afternoon light fell through the east windows in long, pale strips. She thought about her father, who had been a good man, and who had apparently told a duke about his daughter and what he might have said. Yes, she said, I would like that. The case resolved in the spring. Her uncle's clause was found to have been inserted after the original document's execution. The word the solicitors used was fraudulent, which was precise and sufficient. Her uncle retired to the continent, which was where such men generally retired to. Marian received the news in the library, from her own solicitor, who had come in person. She read the letter twice, as she had read Mrs. Dunbar's letter offering her employment, and sat with it for a while in the quiet. The Duke had gone up to London for the week. She wrote to him that afternoon, a short letter, factual, reporting the outcome. She signed it M. Ashworth, as she had always signed her letters to him, because that was who she was, and she had found, over the months, that this was easier to remember than she had expected. He returned 3 days after the letter would have reached him. He found her in the East Garden, which was still not yet in bloom. She was crouching beside the rose bed, examining something close to the soil, and she heard his step on the garden path and looked up. He was still in his traveling coat. He had not even gone inside. "The solicitors have confirmed it," he said. "Yes, the house is yours." "Yes." He looked at her, crouching in the garden with soil on her gloves and a strand of her hair loosened from its pin, and she thought he was going to say something careful and formal, something appropriate to the occasion. "There is something I should like to ask you," he said instead. "And I should like you to understand that it is entirely separate from the matter of the house and the estate and the resolution of the legal proceedings." "I understand," she said. "I should like to be clear," he said, "that I am not asking because the house is now yours, or because the situation is resolved, or because it has become convenient. I am asking because I have spent the better part of 6 months in a house with a woman who cleaned my boots without complaint and knew where the legal volumes were kept and told me the truth in a corridor, when she had 100 reasons not to." Marian rose from her crouch and brushed the soil from her gloves. "You are about to ask me something," she said. "I am," he said. "Then ask it." He asked it. She stood in the garden that had been her father's and her mother's, and was now hers, with the roses not yet in bloom and the wall casting its particular shadow over the east bed, and she considered it for a moment. Not because she was uncertain, but because some moments deserve to be held briefly before you answer them. Then she told him yes.